from Pivot. So today we have a really interesting topic. I think one that has been sort of a controversial debate that's been going on at least recently. I've heard a lot of people questioning the real worth of an MBA. I think we have heard about the ROI of MBA dropping for a while now, but recently, there have been news articles talking about how even the elite MBA schools are sometimes struggling in the current job market to help their graduates land a good role. So, there's a lot of pros and cons of an MBA for sure. And here to discuss that with us today are two brilliant speakers. They are just here with us backstage. They'll be joining very soon. We have Vishal Narayan, who is the co-director of MBA programs from University of Connecticut. And we have Ankur Garg, who is a principal at BCG and also an IMA graduate. So I'll just bring them up here on the stage with me. Perfect. Hello, both. How are you doing? Good to have you here.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity, Arjun. Thank you. Good to be here.
Hey, thank you,
Great.
Arjun. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. I know you both are very busy professionals and we're doing this on a working day. So I think it took some time to get the calendars aligned, but really appreciate you making time for this. I think this is going to be a really terrific topic to cover today because I know personally a lot of people who are in this sort of, kind of a jam thinking about, okay, what to do next in their careers. Many of them want to pursue masters, but have been questioning the practical ROI on it in the recent past. So what we can do is maybe just start with a quick round of intros, and then we'll dive right into it. Sound good? Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So I'll actually just start with a quick round of intro about myself because I don't know how many people know me. I don't want to assume anything. So for those who don't, my name is Arjun. I am the founder of Pivot, and we started Pivot in 21. So it's been about like 3-4 years since we've been doing this, and our core premise is to help people make smoother and more successful career transitions, right? So anytime you're thinking about changing some core element of your profile, whether it's, let's say, your domain, your industry, your level in the organization, or maybe even country shifts as well, these are all areas where we specialize. And in each case, our end goal is to help you land your target role. We'll talk more about this during the course of this session, but for now, I would turn it over to Vishal. Vishal, welcome again. Thank you so much for being with us. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey and what you do today, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Arjun. So, hey, my name is Vishal. As you can tell, I was born in India. I grew up in India. My first degree is in engineering. I got an engineering degree from Delhi University. Really hated it. I didn't like any of those 4 years of my time. And so I thought I'd do an MBA just because I was running away from engineering. So I got an MBA from IIM Lucknow. This was back in the 1990s. Loved my experience at IIM Lucknow. I followed it up with a few jobs in marketing and consulting. And around the year 2002, I decided to move to academics. And so I moved to New York. I got a PhD in marketing from New York University. And since then, I've been a full-time academic. I've been a professor. I teach courses in marketing and I do research. I worked at 3 universities. One is Cornell University, which is one of the 8 Ivy League schools. I've also spent about 8 years in the National University of Singapore. And so if you guys have any questions about, India versus Singapore or India versus the US, I'm happy to take those. For the past few years, I've been at the University of Connecticut. So I manage an MBA program here, which is about 700 students. It's ranked amongst the top 50 programs in the country. And so I'm happy to talk anything that you'd like to know about an MBA in the US or Singapore. I'm more than happy to chat.
Amazing. Great. All right. I think, Ankur, if you could go next.
Sure. Thanks, Arjun. So, hi, everyone. I'm Ankur Garg. I'm a principal at BCG. It's a consulting firm, one of the top strategy management consulting firms across the world. I born and brought up in India, primarily near Delhi. Did my engineering from IIT Delhi, during which time frame I sort of got an inclination towards an MBA. So most engineering schools in India have also now started their business schools. So I did a few courses on management there, really liked them. And as Vishal said, right, was also a ticket to escape from engineering, which I realized probably I'm not a good engineer. So that's where I just decided to pivot my career towards MBA. Joined Ahmedabad, really loved my experience there. Was pretty open when I entered the campus in terms of what I would want to do. Explored consulting, really liked consulting, the kind of exposure it provides, and ended up spending most of my career so far in consulting across McKinsey and BCG. So very happy to talk about Indian MBAs, the debate across IIMs versus ISBs, what you could expect typically at IIMs, and also touch upon consulting. Is MBA really needed for consulting, and what sort of skill set are it at? So happy to touch upon any of those questions as of us.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you both. So let's get started. I think we have a good understanding of where, both of you have come from in terms of your background and what you do today. So, the number one thing that I have been hearing about MBA is in the age of AI. And I hate to start off with that, but honestly, every conversation in careers and corporate is becoming centered more and more around AI. So I do want to start with the elephant in the room. But basically, what people are saying is, in the age of AI, how relevant is an MBA? And I want to talk about maybe like one or two short examples here. We have one of our clients at Pivot who has actually been an engineer, similar to, I guess, both of you, and he wants to transition to more of a product management role, right? Now, we have seen thousands of engineers transition to product management in the past. But what's happening today is the role of product management is becoming a little more nuanced and specialized, where it's not so easy as it used to be, let's say 10 years ago, also because of the supply demand dynamics and all of that. But now, for this individual particularly, there is a question in front of them: do I actually take an online upskilling course which focuses more on the technical aspects of product management, like for example something that would actually help them leverage AI much more effectively for product management? Or do they go by some of the GDs that they have been seeing online, and these are from the larger mature firms which say having an MBA would be a plus for you if you want to target a product management role? That person has been in two minds, right? Not sure, because practically speaking, very candidly, they want to go for the AI related upskilling, right? But when they look at the industry requirements and kind of what's written in the JD, they feel compelled to consider an MBA. I want to start off with this because I feel this is a quandary that's in many people's minds. It's not just that gentleman, right? Vishal, we'll start with you. What would you say to this person, right? Like, how do we think about structuring whether to pursue an MBA or not in such scenarios?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I want to take a step back a little bit. This whole idea that we should compare, say, a certificate with an MBA, which is a much higher investment in terms of time and money. It's maybe a little bit misguided. At least the way that I or people in the US think of an MBA is that it's a lifelong thing. It's a life decision, both in terms of time and money. And so I'll first talk specifically about AI, and then I'll talk a little bit more generally. So the thing that we're seeing about AI is that business schools are adapting. In the US, in Singapore, in Asia, Wharton just rolled out an MBA concentration in AI, which I think is addressed to people like yourselves, the people like the one that you're talking about. And I think it's a matter of time before other business schools follow suit. And so I think business schools are a good training ground to learn about the practical applications of AI. So there's two aspects to AI. One is, how do you build, for example, a large language model? What's the kind of code that you need? Would you have the technical expertise? The other is, what do you do with this thing? For the latter, an MBA, I think, is going to be increasingly useful. Having said that, some of what you learn in any master's degree is going to get redundant in the next 3-4 years. You will learn stuff if you join an MBA this year, you will definitely learn stuff that might not be relevant 3-4 years from now. So I think what an MBA does, or at least hopefully it does, is that it teaches you to continuously upskill. So today it's AI. 5 years from now it could be something else, and I'm sure Ankur will talk to it. The skills that he will need to be a consultant today might not have been taught to him during his MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, a few years back. And so this whole idea, what an MBA does is to open you to the world and say, hey, we're going to teach you a few things about AI, but know that this is going to get redundant. And so you have to go back to something, you have to learn to adapt yourself. For this specific person that you're saying, maybe an online certificate is all that this person needs, honestly. I talk to a lot of prospective MBA students. To a majority, I say, don't do an MBA. It's a bit of an overkill because it's a huge amount of time and money involved. And so if you're looking at picking up a very specific skill that you need for an interview that's going to happen in 6 months, don't think of an MBA. If you want to sort of change your career in a way, and I'll talk more about it later, that opens you up to many different kinds of jobs, product management could be one of them, then think of an MBA.
Interesting. I mean, that does give a sort of good framework to consider. Ankur, what are your thoughts with regard to, how people should be framing their decisions when it comes to, considering the word of an MBA?
Very similar to what Vishal said, right? See, do you need an MBA to shift to product management or to consulting or to any other job after MBA? The answer is no. But does an MBA help? The answer is yes. So it's more about stacking the odds in your favor. I think what Vishal also touched upon was that very often people confuse content with just the concepts that we are learning, right? But MBA is not just about the classroom teaching and just about the concepts that you learn. So in my time, decision science, data analytics used to be a big topic at Ahmedabad. All of us were taught about regression and Excel. But once over the last few years, I've now picked up R, Python, Tableau, which in a way were not existent at that point in time. But they did teach me the way in which I could approach all of these tools because I was already familiar with the base, right? So there's one part which is that tools and technology will keep on changing. But what you're drawing out of it, the insights, the problem solving, the structured way of thinking will always be valuable, right? Which is what an MBA teaches. So there's a point around just core technology content, but there's so many softer aspects which you learn out of an MBA because most of the things are actually in a group. Most of the work is actually case-based learning. You are, you know, at Ahmedabad, I was put in front of 100 people almost on an alternate day to present something on a topic which I had no clue of. And that just develops a lot of your softer skills which are needed to succeed in corporates. So again, I think very similar to what Vishal said, you for if we take example in context this particular person, yes, AI skill set based upskilling platform or a course could help you in the shorter term. MBA is a much more longer investment, and you have to take a longer time frame in mind if you are to actually think of an ROI. You won't get the ROI in 2 years or 3 years, but in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it will give you a good enough ROI if you are actually able to leverage it well.
I just want to add to what Ankur said. So I have so many examples of what Ankur just said, which is that an MBA pays off in the long term. So I just had a student of mine. He was about 30 years old when he did an MBA. He did fairly well. He's now about 45. And I ran into him recently. He said, Vishal, I applied for this job in consulting. I never thought I'd do a consulting career, and it's the best job of my life. He said, I could not have thought of a better career for myself. And he said, the only reason I could do this is because that company took only MBA, so I could not have even applied for it. And so that opportunity would not have existed for me if I did not have an MBA. And also the skills that I picked up 10 years back, it turns out they're relevant to me. So he said, I didn't know how to balance a profit and loss statement, but I learned that during my MBA, and 10 years later, it's coming useful to me. And so, it's hard to say, we want to invest 2 years of our education, 2 years of our time in something that will pay off in the immediate next 2 years. That almost never happens. But in the long run, I've dealt with hundreds of MBA students. I've yet to meet one person who said, no, this was a bad decision. I probably should not have done an MBA.
That's very interesting. Because I actually have heard both sides of the story. So I think there's definitely a mixed bag. Also depends on like what you make out of it, right? As opposed to just the program itself, I think. But the thing that does resonate, and it seems both of you are on the same page on that, is that it's not a short-term kind of a decision. It's more of a lifelong impact and longer term investment and decision. So that makes much more sense. I think there are a lot of people, Vishal, especially like you pointed out, who come to us with a very specific type of transition goal that they have in mind. And for that, they may not always need an MBA, even though it might benefit them, but they may not always need an MBA. So in that case, they may want to, target more of, let's say, like a upskilling course, or whether it's a certification or a master's, that's TBD, but it could be more of a specialized targeted upskilling course. um, that makes sense. Now, the other thing that apart from AI we have been seeing a lot, and hearing a lot, is the restructuring that's happening at a lot of companies around the world. Started in US, now it's cascading pretty much everywhere in the world, in India as well, where not just the MNCs but Indian tech startups are also thinking about how to rejig their talent strategy, how to be more cost effective, have leaner teams and all of that. Want to understand how MBAs are going to be impacted by this shift. I would say kind of a sea shift in talent strategies that companies have been kind of coming up with in the last 2 years or so. And I don't see any sign of stopping, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people think, okay, it's been happening since Elon Musk first did it with Twitter, which was late 2022. It's almost 2.5 years now. Companies are still continuing to lay off in thousands. And a lot of the layoffs that are happening, at least, I mean, I would love to know your thoughts, but I've been hearing that it's happening at the middle layer, the middle management, which is not necessarily the junior level folks who are more execution oriented, or the top leadership teams, which are formulating the strategy for the company. So a lot of these middle managers are masters graduates or MBA graduates. How is the future looking for these folks? Ankur, we can start with you on this one if you want.
Yeah. Sure. So I think 2 points here, right? So one is this is a bit cyclical as well, because in 2020, 2021, we saw a massive hiring done across startups, across corporates. I personally offered people double of their salary that they were making, and still had a hard time retaining those because offers were just flowing left, right, center, and everyone was doing offer shopping at that point in time, right? So I think part of it is cyclical because there was a huge VC funding, huge traction at that point in time. People overhired, and now we are realizing that probably we did not need that much talent. The second part is, if you look at the top tier MBAs, I would say that the value for them still remains. At an entry level, the placements statistics that you see across top colleges in India, the companies which are going there, that has broadly remained consistent in the last 10-15 years. The middle manager point, I would say, is correct. We do see a lot of people in their late 30s, early 40s getting pushed out and moved out. And I would say that's not necessarily an MBA thing. That's more a thing of whether you are adding enough value, because by that time you would have spent 15, 20 years in the industry. And while historically that your experience would have helped you contribute more, but now with AI and with a lot of these technologies, with knowledge becoming so democratic, the value of that experience is becoming questionable. So it's not really an MBA or a non-MBA thing. It's more a thing that if you spend 15, 20 years in your career, what is your value at that point in time? And it is hitting everyone equally.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ankur. I'm just going to add two things to what he said. So one is, there's a sort of risk-return trade-off in your career. So a lot of these jobs where you see a lot of layoffs also tend to be high-paying jobs. So a lot of people want to get into the tech industry. Why? Because say, the salaries are higher than, say, fast-moving consumer goods. And it's true. It's just that's the data supports that. If you're going to be a brand manager in a small FMCG firm, your chances of being laid off are going to be way lower as opposed to if you work for Facebook. So that's the trade-off here. And so, if you're going to enter industries like, high tech or industries that might be impacted by technology, know that there's going to be that risk associated with it. And this might differ a little bit from the US, between the US and India. And I think India seems to be moving in that directions. Layoffs is not a bad word here. Most MBAs and most non-MBAs expect to be laid off at least once or twice in their 30, 40 years career. And here's a question I've asked people. If you're being laid off, do you want to have an MBA or not have an MBA? And the answer is you'd better get laid off with an MBA, because your chances of getting a job after being laid off are going to be higher if you have that degree in your pocket as opposed to not having an MBA. So the answer to that question seems pretty clear. And the other thing I was going to say is, look at the industry you're going to be in very carefully. And I'm the opposite. I'm very risk averse. So part of the reason I moved to academics is I did not want these ups and downs in my career. I love the stability of academics. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, but if you want a career like that, where you don't want to risk that, you want a stable salary which will never increase by more than 25% a year, but never also fall below the rate of inflation, then you make your choices. So I think it's a very sort of personal decision in some way.
Yeah, I guess it's based on your risk appetite and kind of,
Yeah.
like what really suits you on a day-to-day basis and in the long term. I think a lot of people who went into a high-paying career sort of had regrets later in case they face those lows that comes with the highs as well. I think that definitely is there. So, one of the things with regard to this, whole layoff situation that's also happening is uh, I think salaries have come down and people are feeling the financial pinch, so to speak, over the last couple of years. And that's actually impacting their decision to, you know, take courses, upskill, go for higher studies. A lot of people do want to invest this time, especially if they are not seeing a lot of growth in their careers into upskilling. They want to even consider MBAs. Um, just momentarily on this topic, because we do hear about this a lot, like cost of education is increasing, especially in US, but also at, I think, IIMs in India, for example. How do people think about financing apart from, let's say, the typical routes, which is, let's say, getting a scholarship, which is not commonly available, and then apart from that there is loans, and you pay off the loans and so forth. But because of this decreasing ROI, at least from a technical financial perspective, a lot of people are questioning whether they should invest all of that money into getting a loan if they are not necessarily getting a scholarship. So any thoughts before we move on to the other topic? Any thoughts on financing of an MBA and whether there are any new age approaches which will de-risk your your finances when pursuing an expensive MBA?
So,
Either one of you, please feel free to. Yeah.
if I may, I only have a couple of small things to say here. So one thing that's becoming increasingly popular in the US in terms of the MBA market is a part-time MBA. And so, you are able to fund your MBA partly through your savings and partly because you're actually earning money. That market has been growing faster. A surprisingly large number of companies fund their employees through a part-time MBA. It comes with a contract, so typically it says we'll fund, say, $50,000 of your MBA, but then after that you're obliged to work with us for, say, 2 more years after an MBA. And so that's a very, very common way of funding your MBA. The other thing I'll say is the MBA is the most expensive master's degree, at least in the US. There's a bunch of other master's programs that are cheaper. There's 1-year master's programs that are doing extremely well. These are what we call specialized masters. So masters in financial technology, a master's in human resource management. And we can talk later about the value of a specialized master's versus an MBA. But if there's a financial constraint, you might be better off with just a specialized master's and not like this massive 2-year degree.
Got it. Yeah, Uncle.
No, makes sense. And I think maybe just to add a couple of points here, right? So it also depends on your personal appetite. Like one of the reasons I didn't want to go for an international MBA was because of the fees. I didn't want that burden on me at that age. I knew if I join a top tier Indian MBA, I can still pay it back in a couple of years of working, and that still gives me the flexibility to move around, experiment with my career if I want to. So I think that inherent appetite and your starting point does impact. And the second thing is, I also feel that the narrative that salaries are stagnating,
Yeah.
I'm a bit unsure of that at the entry level, because when I look at least in consulting, when the salary at which I joined and the fees of IIM Ahmedabad at that point in time, and the entry level salary today in consulting and the fees of IIM Ahmedabad or even Bangalore, Calcutta, Lucknow, the ratio has not changed. So I think a lot of this narrative is also because of the cyclical nature of the business. We saw a lot of hikes in the last few years, because of which we now feel that salaries have stagnated. But I think it's also a cycle that we're going through, and it just will improve in the coming future. But that ratio of fees to salary, at least for the top tier MBA in India, has not changed over the years.
Ankur, just because you've raised the point around cyclicality twice now, I just want to actually address that because in normal economic cycles, I agree with you. Just to play devil's advocate, I'm not saying whether one side is right versus the other or not. But do you think today the kind of tech advancement that you're seeing and the magnitude of layoffs that we are seeing this time around, not by companies which are shutting shop, but companies who are sitting on record level profits and free cash flow, are laying people continuously for an extended period of time? You believe that cycle is going to change and these tech companies or some other sectors are going to do mass hirings to offset the layoffs that have happened, like in a typical economic cyclical kind of a time frame?
Yes, because that's what
Yeah.
history has told us multiple times, right? So when machines came into picture, people at that time also got laid off from industries, but other sectors then
Mhm.
picked up. Even today, when you look at AI advancements that are happening, so companies are laying off because they're getting productivity gains from AI, but someone at the back end still needs to make that
Mhm.
model. And even if you go a level down, someone needs to actually clean the data, someone needs to establish the lineage. So a lot of AI services also have come up in the market. A lot of startups have come up in that segment. So while one part of the business and your skills in a way become
Mhm.
redundant, it will open up opportunities in other
Mhm.
spectrum. So
Got it.
going by history, I do strongly believe that there will be jobs. It's just that the
Sure.
nature of those jobs and the work profile will
Yeah,
change.
if I may just quickly add to that, one reason that an MBA helps deal with these cyclicalities is that it's relatively easier to move across industries if you have an MBA. So if you
Correct.
work in banking, you get laid off. There's nothing to stop you to apply to an FMCG marketing job. They'll happily consider you, interview you. There's a lot of tech people who were laid off who now have better jobs at higher salaries, but they're not in tech. They're in some other industry. And so there's this cross industry movement that an MBA enables that I think gets underappreciated a few times, which you kind of realize post MBA. I don't know if that's the Indian experience, though. I see that a lot in the US. I don't know how true it is for India.
I think that's true. That's true, Vishal. Even in India, we do see that, right? So, see, engineering is a very
Yeah.
specialized degree. If you are a chemical engineer, you are very good at chemical engineering. MBA is a generalist degree. It teaches you the fundamentals of business. It teaches you how to think logically. It teaches you communication. It teaches you how to work in teams, right? And those skills are fairly replicable across industries. And which is why, if I look at my cohorts, who graduated say 10 years back, I would say almost like 50-60% of them have shifted the job profiles and multiple times. So even if I take my example, I joined consulting, I left consulting, joined Paytm for a brief while. I was running a P&L there, very different work from consulting, came back to consulting. Obviously, those switches needs some room for you to understand the nuances, but fundamentally, that toolkit that you carry is fairly replicable.
Fair enough. Um, Yeah, at some point, I think I want to specifically address what cases you would not recommend in MBA because I do hear a lot of
Yeah, for sure.
positive feedback on the kind of use cases and advantages of an MBA
Oh, I
in
can
both
talk a lot about the
recession.
negatives.
Yeah, I
There's
think
no
we did
problem.
briefly touch upon like the fact that you tell a lot of people not to pursue. I would love to deep dive on that in a second. But just
Yeah.
before we do that, two things I want to do is first tell the audience who has joined us, thank you for joining us. Please ask your questions for Vishal and Ankur in the chat. We will start taking up those questions soon. You can also, in case you don't want to publicly share the question for whatever reasons, you can privately just send it over to me. I will share it with Ankur and Vishal, and we'll be all set. We'll be covering these questions very shortly, so please stay back and do share any questions you have. The second thing I want to do is kind of bring up that topic that we were discussing backstage right before starting of this session about this whole theme of India versus abroad, or let's take it more specifically, India versus US, in terms of pursuing an MBA for especially folks who are currently based in India, since that's a majority of the audience that we have right now. Now, I myself have studied in US. I understand it's a fairly, expensive undertaking, no matter at what level, whether it's undergrad or for masters. In current times, I feel education costs have risen. While for most people in the middle class level who typically think about an MBA, I don't think salaries in India have risen or kept pace with the education cost, at least over the last few years. Right now, how should folks who are in India right now think about considering an MBA from India versus outside India, and especially the US market? I believe, Vishal, you've also had experience in Singapore, so perhaps we can cover that market as well, since there are some really good schools in Singapore too. So, how should one consider domestic versus abroad markets when pursuing an MBA? Vishal, actually, we can maybe start off with you on this one.
Yeah. Let me talk of the similarities first between the two markets, between India and the US. What you will learn is very similar. And what you will learn goes to what Ankur said. Essentially, you get the same toolkit. You learn to think differently, you learn to think broadly, you learn all aspects of a business. In fact, many of the courses will look exactly the same. In India, you might learn more Indian cases. In the US, you might learn more US cases. But the skill set that you're picking up does not vary much at all. In fact, now we have this increasing thing where a lot of professors in the US are Indian like me. And there's increasingly there's American professors teaching in India. So those distinctions are slowly disappearing. The thing that an MBA in the US does is that it sets you up for a career in the US, which you will not get obviously after you do an Indian MBA. So to me, the question is more about where do you want to live long term? Where do you see your life long term? Do you want to live in the US or do you want to live in India? And that's again a very, very personal decision. And I'll stick to the professional aspect of it because personal stuff varies across people. Do you want to, for example, be in a team where most people will not be Indian, will not know your language, and you will have to speak in their language, perhaps with their accent all the time? The answer is yes for some people. It's also a huge no for other people. So, be comfortable with that aspect. The other aspect is cultural. The way of working in the US tends to be very, very different from the way of the expectations are different. Sometimes, not always, Indians are held to a higher expectations, so you have to be okay with that. A big advantage, for example, is I know people in Facebook who work in the US and they work in India. The Indian people always seem to be reporting to people in the US. And so they're like, we seem to be doing really important work, but it's like we wish we were in the headquarters in the US because that's where the action lies. It's true for a lot of brand management jobs where a lot of big decisions, if you will, are made in the US. So if you want to be part of, an American large global MNC where a lot of decision making happens in the US and you want to build your life in the US, it's 2 years of your life, and if you can afford it, go for it. The other thing I want to add is, being in India, oftentimes we think of US MBA as a sort of one big homogenous block. There's many, many different kinds of MBA in the US. Typically people will look at a Harvard or a Wharton. These are very, very high-priced MBAs for most Americans also. So for example, if you look at what are called public universities, so the equivalent of IIMs, which are not privately owned, they're publicly owned. So think of, say, the University of Texas at Dallas, or say Penn State, or say the University of Connecticut. These are amongst the top 50 universities in the world. They're definitely not a Harvard or an MIT. They're priced way lower. The ROI on these, we compete on ROI. So our big thing is ROI. Why? Just because the cost is lower, And so I have Indian students who will tell me that, the fees at the University of Connecticut is the same as the fees at an ISB. It's actually a little bit lower. And so purely in terms of cost implications, Indian MBA fees are rising way higher than American MBA fees. And so that straight away impacts your ROI of doing an MBA in the US. And just to add towards something, I think Arjun, you had pointed this out earlier about cyclicality. There's usually a negative correlation. So when the economy is doing bad, the MBA market goes up, and vice versa. And so now, the MBA market is exploding. I mean, you just Google and see. If you Google the growth rate in MBA markets, take any country, you'll find that it's growing. We're actually thinking of opening more MBA programs, not fewer. And so there's a lot more demand now. I think it's related to, and it's going to reverse. We know it's going to reverse. So there's a lot of demand for now.
Got it. I think that was very helpful and pointed. What my takeaway was from that, although I would love to see if Ankur has a different take on this, but what my takeaway was that it's contextual mostly. There is no clear advantage or disadvantage of pursuing
Absolutely.
US. Okay. Ankur, would you
No, I
share
think
anything along the lines? Could you take a stance where you would
sure.
say there is some advantage or disadvantage of pursuing one versus the other, like abroad versus domestic MBA?
See, uh, the MBA intake in a way differs between India and US, right? So in
Yeah,
India, freshers, people with 1 year, 2 year experience, they are able to do the MBA, versus usually people with 2 to 4 years experience is what makes most of the B schools in the US, right? So that changes a few dynamics. The diversity of batch that you get is obviously much more robust, I would say, in a US B school versus an Indian B school. Most people in India, 85% will be engineers. Significant chunk, will be skewed towards males, which is not true in the US, right? So that diversity of batch and experiences is much more there. The case examples, I feel most Indian B schools do a great job at bringing in the right case examples, and a lot of global case studies, so don't really think that's a differentiator. The other thing which I feel is a big differentiator and more pro side for Indian campuses is the campus placements. So in US there's no
yeah.
concept of campus placement. In India, if you enter a B school, you're fairly certain you'll get a job out of it. You'll get a job and you can pay back your fees. In US, you get a 90 or a 120-day period to figure out a job after your MBA is ended, and if not, you have a risk of getting sent back to your home country, right? So that's the other angle, which is more a pro for the Indian MBAs. Largely, I would say the choice depends on whether you want a global career or an Indian career. I have, in my experience, seen people who have went out, did an MBA from Ivy League, came back to India. I have personally not seen them having a lot of advantage in the Indian market because of that. They are treated fairly at par with IIMs, ISBs, folks here. But conversely, yes, if you have an MBA from a USB school versus if I were to say switch to US today, I will be at a slight disadvantage. That's for sure in that market. So it really depends on whether you want to have a global career or an Indian career. For Indian careers, I do believe top tier Indian colleges do a great job at it. For global careers, yes, they are at a disadvantage.
The only thing I'll add to this is most of us do not make it to an IIM. Let's sort of face it. The proportion of applicants who make it to a quote unquote top college, whether it's the US or India, is very, very tiny. And so when I am assuming that we're talking to, the average applicant here who will probably not go to an IIM or an ISB or a Harvard or an MIT. And so for them, it's these sort of quote unquote non Ivy Leagues or non IIMs that become very, very important. Ankur, this is a question to you. I don't know how placement works for those kinds of schools. I'm guessing it's very comparable to what you'd see in the US. I've heard mixed stories about placement for those schools also.
No, I think that's fair, Vishal. So I think there is a significant step down from your top tier colleges in India versus the next tier, wherein you start to see that tapering coming in terms of placements and salaries. Yes, that's true. At the same time, there's also a tapering in terms of their education fees.
Yeah,
So sort of those will also not
for
charge
sure.
that much, but that's a fair point.
Okay. So I think that's a, that I think it's just like we discussed the contextual decision, and most of the times it boils down to, it seems like, whether you want more of a domestic career within your home country, or you're thinking about more of a global career. I think the answer becomes more or less aligned to that. um, Now, the other thing that we have been thinking about a lot is, as Vishal, you were pointing out, that business schools are booming, and at least right now, based on the current market environment, a lot of people are thinking about upskilling and future proofing themselves, and MBA definitely seems to be one of the biggest ways to do that. Now, when people are doing that, I'm assuming that the competition amongst candidates goes up and the selection rates drop to some extent, especially for the elite and the competitive schools. Um, can we discuss a little bit about, like, what kind of candidates are considered more suitable for the competitive schools? I'm not just talking about the Harvard and Stanford IIMs, but maybe the next level down, perhaps the tier twos as well. Because, like we said, most of the people in this room today are probably not always going to make the top 0.1 or 0.5% of the school. So, how do we help more candidates not just make a decision around pursuing or not pursuing an MBA, but making sure that if they have decided to pursue an MBA, they land at the best school possible for them? How do we make them or help them make that happen?
So I can take that maybe in Indian context, right? So in India, the most difficult task is actually acing the cat itself, right? So uh, I think personally, I felt, and honestly, I didn't clear the cutoff for ABC in my first attempt, and it was only the second attempt that I got in, and I do consider myself very fortunate to actually get into Ahmedabad at that year as well. So I think one thing is start taking those mocks early on to figure out where do you land. So if you look at the test series across most coaching institutes like Time, CL, at least they were the prominent ones in my time. I'm not sure what has happened in the recent market landscape, but they do give you a clear picture of where you could land. So if my percentile in that mock was coming around 99.5, I knew largely if I scale it up to Indian average, I would somewhere land in the same range, and that helped me define my sort of set of schools that I could target. So I think that's really important to know where exactly do you stand, and then focus your preparation along that. Because I honestly think it's very difficult if you are starting from a lower point to actually then cover up the ground significantly in a short period of time to end up at a very high percentile, because the room for percentile improvement in CAT is actually fairly limited compared to some of the other competitive exams, because it's a large part of it is just driven by your, whether you had maths in class 10th or not, how actively did you read English in your life, how actively do you look for patterns, right? So a large part of it, I think, becomes inherent to you throughout the years versus acquired. And the second part, I would say, is once you sort of narrow down to the kind of schools that you are looking at, then is to ace the interview process or the essay writing. Those are the two critical components in most Indian schools, even at tier two, tier three level. So trying to, keeping abreast with the latest topics and actually having a point of view on that, because people are not looking for facts, people are looking for your point of view on that particular event. So, and it could be wrong at times, but what people are looking is, are you thinking through the issues, and that do you actually have a voice on that matter? I think those two components, in my way, in my mind, form the two most important part of your preparation, and to land at the best possible school that you can.
I think that's very helpful. Just one question there, Ankur. You didn't really touch upon, the actual application in terms of, let's say, the essays and the recommendations and all that stuff. Like, would you say that's not as important as the other things you did focus on, the score and, the interview preparation? Or do you think it's just kind of you're stacking it in a priority order, that everything is important? It's just that the CAT scores and interview process is the more important of any other factor?
In Indian context, I would say the CAT score is the most important thing, because see, most schools will call a ratio of 1:5, 1:7 in terms of the kind of number of profiles that they want to admit, right? Out of 2.5 lakh people, getting into that shortlist is the most difficult part. Once you get in there, usually you get 2 to 3 months time to prepare your essays, to prepare your group discussions, and how you want to lead that, which in my mind is sufficient to do that kind of prep. Indian B schools are not so heavily fixated on the essays as US B schools are. So you don't have to submit an essay in advance. It's not, you don't have to submit an SOP. It's largely on the same day. You're given a topic, you write something on it, they check your thought process, and they score you on that. So that's why in Indian context, I would say acing the cat is the most important part. Other things can be managed as long as you are able to do that cat part well.
That's helpful. Thank you. Vishal, I think it would be obviously pretty organic of you to kind of address the US market scene or the Singapore, I guess.
Yeah, there's only a couple of differences. So one is experience matters a lot more for American and Asian business schools. The average age of an MBA is about 30 years in the US. So, 5, 6, 7 years of experience. And therefore, the essay matters. So, what you've done in those years of working matters a lot. And not just, if you've been sort of writing code for the past 5 years, that's fine. But say, do you understand how it's being used? What's the business aspect of it? A diversity of experiences matters. So have you had a situation where you addressed 5 senior managers in a room and presented to them for 30 minutes? Essentially, what we're looking for is how well you're going to do in the classroom and how well you're going to do after you graduate. We're very wary of students who all they care about is a high ROI. And so the ROI mentality, while perfectly understandable from a candidate's viewpoint, doesn't go really so well. So American institutes tend to be very academic in that, will the student have a good experience? Will they contribute to the class discussion? So all American institutes get a lot of applicants from India. So what is it about you that's different from the other applicants? So for example, if you're an Indian person and you work for a year in China, your application will shine because it's so unique. No one does that. So what is it about you that's unique becomes very important.
Got it. So I guess in that scenario, more than just, let's say, your GMAT score, it's your essays, it's your
GMAT is important
recommendations.
because, like Ankur said, it's an easy cutoff. So most schools
Right.
will say, okay, we'll look at only people beyond a certain GMAT score.
Mhm.
And for business schools in the US, it's very important to put together a diverse class. So if they go only by GMAT scores, they can fill up the class only based on Asian students, but they won't do that. And so they want to build a cohort of not just diverse from a country standpoint, but diverse from a experience standpoint. So there'll be people who have no background in engineering or the harder skills. I think there'll be more of an emphasis on softer skills or any evidence that you have of possessing soft skills. I think those things become more important.
And I think that's a key point of
Yeah,
difference, right, from the Indian
absolutely.
market. Because in US, in a B school, you can have a very high variation in the GMAT
Oh
score.
yeah,
Someone at a 600, someone at a 750 might end up at the same
yeah,
score. In India,
yeah,
that variation is
yeah.
very limited.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think we were also talking about gender representation earlier. I think Ankur, you were saying it's much more biased towards,
Oh,
males.
for us, it's a big objective. We all of us aim for a 50% gender ratio. It's a big thing for us.
Right. Right. Okay. Great. I think we have only a few minutes left, so I would love to take up the questions that we have from our audience here. Um, So let's start with the first one, which actually is something we have perhaps covered at least tangentially. Maybe this would be a more direct head-on question. So we have a question from Gayatri, which is more about the ROI perspective. So I think there are a lot of people who do think of it from that perspective. So the
Yeah.
question is the ROI of a 20 to 40 lakh MBA still justified when compared to alternatives like online learning boot camps? Um, and I think I just want to caveat this. I'm not 100% sure if Gayatri means necessarily the Coursera short form course, or it could be, let's say, an upgrad or great learning, more like 6 month to 12 month kind of a long form and more expensive kind of a course. I would assume it's a let's just assume it's a latter and it's not the Coursera short form course.
Sure. I think, see, my personal take, and we did touch upon that earlier in the conversation as well, right? So, MBA is a much longer term thing. So, that ROI for 20, 40 lakhs won't be visible in the first 3, 4 years. It only starts to come into picture once you've spent some time post your MBA. Short term ROI for the courses, like you said, like for a grad, a 6 to 12 month course might actually be higher. So if you're only optimizing for ROI in the next 3 years, maybe that upgrad short cycle courses is the way to go. If you're really looking to change career paths, figure out what you want to do, have some broader exposure than just the content piece of it, then an MBA is the way to go.
Yeah, and just one point of clarification there. When you said upgrad might have more ROI, you mean the investment is lower, not that the return is higher, or what's?
Like in the short term, like if you, so in the example that we took at the beginning of the session, right? So if someone is looking to get into product management, doing a 6 to 12 month boot camp for product management and landing a job in product management can happen with that, right? So your ROI there is much more visible in the short term versus spending. If you then compare it to, say, someone who spent 20 to 40 lakhs and then got into product management, yes, there will be difference. The question to then ask is, 10 years down the line, does that MBA help you elevate your presence in the organization, and does it create more opportunities for you than, or not? That's where the ROI then starts to come into picture.
Got it.
The only thing I'll add to that is that, don't take an ROI as a given. You can influence the ROI number a lot after you enter the MBA program. So if you're going with the expectation that, oh, a job is, I'm just going to take courses and, not do much else, and a job is just going to come to me, I can bet you your ROI will not be as high as many other people. Ankur touched upon this. So people who do well are people who network a lot, who are happy to go and cold call to companies and say, hey, here's my resume, get coffee with alums. If you're more extroverted, if you do those kinds of activities a lot more, and career services and all business schools will guide you to do it, your ROI is going to be higher. And Ankur, as you said in an earlier post, even at Harvard, there's people who don't get jobs. So the ROI for them. So will you say Harvard has an ROI of zero? I mean, it depends on what you do there, really. We've had people who had very, very high ROIs. And then let me tell you, all business schools have people who will not get a job. So, let's also face that. So a lot depends on the individual also here.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Harvard, though, I'm sure you must have read all these headlines and major, media articles about not just Harvard, but actually all the Ivies having lesser folks who land a job within the first, I believe, 30 to 60 days of their graduation, at least in the latest job market. I think it's been almost equally impacted across the top tier schools because it's a down market right now. And I feel like maybe people are looking at that and extrapolating as like something that is going to remain forever as opposed to it being just cyclical, as Ankur you've been pointing out, right? Anything that you want to touch upon that part, because again, since we are addressing this big elephant of ROI in the room, maybe this statistic that's been floated around pretty in a viral manner, it's making its rounds. Like, how do we address that, either assuage people or justify their concerns?
See, fundamentally, there's one thing I've learned, that data is only there to support your argument. So you can create any argument and you'll be able to find the data for it, right? If you look at the last 2 years, you can then say that there's no ROI. People are There are salary cuts. If you look at a 10-year view, you'll find some other pattern, right? Fundamentally, I do believe that and personally for me, like, I think MBA has given me a great ROI. I was a very introverted person in college. MBA taught me about public communication. It helped me open up to networking, which was considered a very negative thing, at least in my mind, till the time I ended up at a school. It gave me an opportunity to explore a career in consulting, which I've stayed quite consistent with. So I think a lot of these changes that happened would not have been possible for me without an MBA. And yes, if you are someone who's very keen, very deeply interested in one profession, one area, that I really want to be a product manager, yes, you can be a product manager without an MBA as well. There's no one stopping you there. But if inherently you're looking to get this exposure, explore what options exist for you. I think that exploration, that exposure, very few degrees give besides an MBA.
Just
Correct.
want to quickly
Let's.
add to this ROI is really, really quickly. When you read an article that says an ROI, a lot of people did not get jobs at a business school. Also know that a lot of people get job offers, but they don't accept them. I've had students who've said, I got 4 job offers. I said no to all of them because, hey, I will work on the Wall Street and nowhere else. And so sometimes the best and brightest students will not have jobs at the end of 6 months because they're happy to wait it out. They're not bothered by waiting a year. And so there's a lot that goes on in terms of, how many people are actually working after their MBA.
Got it. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. So, a couple of the questions are slightly similar, which are related to investment in MBA. So, I think we'll skip those because we spent a lot of time discussing this topic. I'm hoping those questions have been properly addressed. Now, a couple of the other ones are also something we may have discussed earlier, but not in a lot of detail. What are the situations where you would not recommend an MBA? And instead recommend, let's say, a micro MBA program. So not a traditional MBA, but let's say an online MBA program or a part-time MBA program or one of these, I think, masters, a specialized masters program. What are the situations where people should consider the alternative upskilling routes versus an MBA?
I can go first. So,
Sure.
at least in the US, there's 2 different ways to think. So, one is there's MBA, which includes online MBA, part-time MBA, full-time MBA. The other is the specialized masters. These are meant for very, very different kinds of people. So, the specialized masters is meant for someone who straight out of college, who does not want to spend 2 years, does not have the amount of money that or time that it will take to get an MBA. Just want to pick up some skills really, really quickly, usually on the technical side of it. Because the biggest non-MBA masters is the masters in analytics. Many of the masters in analytics in the US have more than 80% students from Asia. So it's the typical makeup of these programs. They do well, there's a fairly high chance of getting a job after these kinds of masters. They're about a year long, lower investment. An MBA is not targeted at these people. So we do not admit people who do not have experience. So that's the kind of sort of distinction in terms of, what kinds of people should do an MBA. Within an MBA, there's increasingly less distinction between a part-time and an online or a full-time MBA. One of the things I do is to talk to a lot of employers who hire MBAs, not just from us, but from many other institutes. They're somewhat surprisingly, they're seeing less of a distinction, partly because, after COVID, business schools have adapted. In 2020, the quality of online education was really bad. Now it's gotten pretty damn good. And in some ways, the online experience is better because I teach a course online. I have speakers from all over the world in that class, which I cannot do in an in-person class. So in some ways, the experience tends to be even better. And so that distinction. So if you're the kind of person who wants to do an MBA, but an online MBA is the only MBA you can do, I'd say go for it. But MBA versus other masters is a very different comparison.
Got it. But you're saying that the playing field is kind of getting leveled within the MBA
very quickly.
segments.
Yeah, it's almost there. Although part-time MBA is meant for working professionals. So again, that's a different segment.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Ankur, I know maybe you might have less exposure to this, but feel free to share your thoughts on, like the differences in these different types of programs.
No, I think resonate with what Vishal said, right? Fundamentally, I think MBA versus non-MBA, if you look at it, it's a concept of whether you want to be a generalist or a specialist. MBA is a generalist degree. You can do a specialization in AI, in data analytics, and everything along with an MBA. That's fine, but largely you will still remain a generalist in your career, right? So if that is something which excites you, it's probably a better fit. If you really want to say go deeper into one field, engineering or data analytics, AI, then probably getting one of those other master's degrees would make the most sense for you. So in a way, you need to figure out it's not a simple answer, but for each person, they need to figure out what kind of work they enjoy the most and where will they actually have fun, right? and that will determine the decision of whether you should go for an MBA or not. And then within the MBA, as Vishal said, obviously then the question really becomes, if you want to go for an online MBA, part-time MBA, or a full-time program, wherein a lot of these ROI related questions start popping up. And again, it becomes a very personal decision as to what makes the most sense for you.
Got it. I think we have come up on our time, so let's start wrapping things up. I would firstly like to thank everybody who joined us. Thank you so much for taking time out on Tuesday evening and Tuesday morning for you, Vishal. Any parting thoughts from you both in terms of how people should think about an MBA going forward? Obviously, it's all very contextual, but if there was one key mantra learning that you want to leave our audience with, feel free to share that.
I think personally, for me, speak to people who have been in your shoes, right? So, because while we have given some inputs, insights from our experience, but a lot of people might not be in the same boat, right? So, personally, what helped me was in my college when I spoke to my seniors, people who actually went for an MBA, and tried to understand from them what can I expect, and that helped me make that switch. So similarly, speaking to people who are part of the same boat, similar context, similar education, similar family background, finances, that will give you much more clarity if this is the right path for you and whether you can see some success there.
Great. I think that's a terrific advice.
Couple of really quick things. Firstly, this is the best time ever to pursue higher education. There's so many options in terms of many different kinds of masters, online MBA, part-time MBA, masters in analytics, and so on. But it comes with a caveat, which is that, do your own research. It's easy for us to hear to say, do what works for you. But what works for you is a question that's really hard to answer when you're in your 20s. So, just step back a little bit and think about really where do you want to live? What kind of work do you want to do on a daily basis? And unless there's a big financial constraint, let the answer come from what kind of work you want to do and where you want to live. And then all of these questions will start to feel a little bit easier to answer. And good luck to everyone. This is not an easy choice at all.
No, absolutely not. That's why I think this session was so important. I mean, I learned a lot. Obviously, I've made my decision already, so I don't think it swayed my mind. But I really do hope a lot of the people who joined us today found it helpful. I think it was very pointed, very insightful. Really, thank you so much, both Vishal and Ankur, for joining again. And in case anybody in the room is today thinking about transitioning to new type of role or industry, thinking about an MBA, just feel free to check out our website. You will have professionals similar to Ankur and Vishal there, who you can speak with, get more personalized and objective feedback, and see if it helps you make better and more informed decisions. But yeah, that's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
luck.
Bye.